Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to the series about anger, books my dad picked on the theme of anger that will never have a better title because this is my grand finale that I have been trying to figure out. Actually, for the record, this is my second attempt at recording this because I went over my time limit and, those of you who actually like listening to me will know I just turn on the thing and talk and then shut it off when I'm done or when I hit 15 minutes, whichever comes first. So I didn't realize my timer had hit 15 minutes until I looked down and saw it was after, and then, anyways, you're not interested. So the thing about this series was we have 6 books, and they're wildly different books. Clarke and Ellison are similar in that they're both speculative fiction. Arthur C. Clarke is writing what we would specifically in this day and age call science fiction, whereas Harlan Ellison's Deathbird Stories is what we called sci-fi back in ye olden days before people created 1,000,001 subgenres of speculative fiction. Deathbird Stories has fantasy, has sci-fi, has just general speculative stuff. These stories of gods, because that is one of the themes that he puts throughout Deathbird, is that these are, to him at least, stories about gods, about what people worship, and so on. Whereas Maggie Girl on the Streets is I don't know quite the proper literary terminology. If I were talking in terms of visual arts, I would probably have leaned this into the concept of realism, because realism in the visual arts had to do with not merely painting things as they are, in terms of, this thing actually looks like something, but in terms of painting the world as it really is, as in saying, this laborer on a train looks like this, and he looks sad, and he looks tired, and he looks rumpled, and that is because that is what the life of laborers is like. And Maggie Girl on the Streets is realism in that sense of it's telling a realistic story about realistic bad things that happen, and that it's a bunch of bad choices from nearly everybody concerned, but they're understandable. When Maggie makes her bad choices, you can see how she's making bad choices, and you can look at it and say, man, you should have seen that this was a bad choice, but at the same time, you can understand why she would make that choice. And so you have those. Then you have the Abyss of Crew, which is fiction, which is the fourth one of these, which is fiction. And that is very specifically metaphor and commentary on a specific set of issues, on specifically about the Watergate scandal, specifically about Richard Nixon, specifically about politicians being untrustworthy, specifically about the absolute undeniable use of the phrase plausible deniability. And then you get Quentin Crisp, The Naked Civil Servant, which is autobiography, and Mordecai Richler, which is practically journalism. I mean, it's a massively extended op-ed. It's, very much an editorial commentary. It's just somebody, writing about the events of the Quebec separation thing that had been going on in this country for, ever. Or at least felt like it to me, but that's because I grew up with this on the news constantly, endlessly, painfully. I mentioned this at the time. Mordecai Richler's O Canada, Quebec is one of the books here that I connected to the most, simply because I remember watching this go by on the news. It's all back there in my head with the Charlottetown Accords and the Meech Lake Accords and the things and all the things. So it's a thing that speaks to me. But each of these is different, because Mordecai Richler and Muriel Spark are writing sort of in the same vein, that is, about a situation and the people in the situation acting badly, but while she has written through metaphor and fiction in an effort to help people get their minds into the mindset of how she feels about this situation, into the mindset of understanding what all of the Watergate stuff actually really means, sort of on a fundamental, individual, human, personal level. Mordecai Richler is basically just reading the news off and then adding a certain amount of, and then I was really cranky about that. And it's very, very different, because facts is facts, but the whole point of fiction is to allow people to step into somebody else's shoes, because as you are not limited by the facts in fiction, you can then make sure that people genuinely understand the emotional issues, the personal, real life costs and whatnot that happen with a given situation. Quentin Crisp, it's autobiography. In a way, Quentin Crisp the Naked Civil Servant in this list stands very much alone, because he's not making a point. He's just telling a story. It's a true story, but it's just sort of, you might find this entertaining. It's incident, it's just there to entertain. And the other 5 of these books are pointed in some way, which makes it different. Maggie Girl on the Streets stands out from the other 5, because Maggie Girl on the Streets is the one that my father picked because people were angry at the author for writing this. Because the thing about realism in that way is that it's very, very uncomfortable. It's deliberately uncomfortable, because it's about making a point, about pointing out to people that this situation exists, that poverty that is ungenteel and unkind exists, and how that poverty leads to the kinds of bad ends that we see in Maggie, a Girl of the Streets. And it stands out for that reason. I feel that Arthur Clarke's Childhood's End stands out because, as I've said, this is the book that you read it and you're surprised that nobody in it is angry, because nobody seems to actually be angry, even though, the aliens come down and they tell people, you have to do what we say, because we're just going to make you. And then at the end of the book they say, by the way, what we were working up to is making sure that your children get to go off and become like a giant alien overmind thing, and you're never going to see them again. And also, by the way, you have all these people who basically wind up giving up, and it's the end of the human race, and it's ridiculous. It's horrifying, and there's no anger. There's just apathy. And on the one hand, you can get the apathy, but on the other hand, it's really surprising nobody's angry. You get to Harlan Ellison's Deathbird. The thing about Harlan Ellison is my father described him as being an angry man, and you read these stories and you can see that most of what's in there is him expressing his ire at how people are, about how people can be hypocritical, about basically everything. It's just a bundle of the author complaining through metaphor about people are terrible. And you read this, 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 and And it stands out from the other things because, of course, first, this is a collection of short stories rather than a single, complete work, but because it's a bunch of different things. Quentin Crisp isn't angry. The anger in this book is the people who were angry at Quentin Crisp for being flamboyant and gay, which, you watch the news, you see that. People get angry at the LGBT community for being, not, quote, normal, unquote. And, it is what it is. I'm not really going to go into that, but, it's there. So he's not angry, and you read Quentin Crisp and you feel a little bit like The Naked Servant is partly written by somebody who has gotten past anger, who's sort of at the point of, I'm just going to shrug and have a good time because life is too short to be this angry and I'm just not going to bother. Whereas Harlan Ellison is saying life is too short not to be angry. People are taking this short life and making it worse for everybody, and you're all awful, and I hope you choke. It's very, very active and front-loaded and personal. And that's the thing about these 6 books, is I've been virtually incoherent on the topic because the connecting thread is supposed to be anger, but it's not the same anger. It's not anger directed in the same ways. It's not anger about the same sorts of things. It's not even anger expressed in the same way in each of these books. 3 of them, the author is angry, and in 3 of them, the author is merely stating things. In 2 of them, the author is sort of pointing at a specific item, a specific thing that you should be angry about, whereas in 2 of them, the anger is more people directing it at a sort of a generalized, is directing it at a side of society of people being angry about something that either can't be helped, or being angry about the fact that somebody is pointing out a thing exists. That Naked Civil Servant and Maggie Girl on the Streets were basically saying, here are a bunch of people, Maggie Girl on the Streets, the people who are angry in that book are, the anger is misdirected. It's aimed in the wrong ways. It's thrown around without an understanding genuinely about what they're angry about or why. And as I said, Childhood's End, the shocking thing is that nobody's angry. In a way, of course, it holds that thing in common with the Abbess of Crewe in that, to an extent, she's asking, why aren't you angry? But my final thoughts on this are confused and confuzzled because I can't come up with something that gives these books a through line, that gives these books some kind of unifying thread. And I think that's what makes this particular sub-series so interesting, is there is no through line. And I'm not even sure what else to say to wrap this up. My next series, I have said in another video that may or may not have gone up since then, that my next series will be books that I probably should have read before, but it's going to be desultorily done and picked by me, so you'll just have to hang in there and see what happens with it. Anyhow, thus ends the series on books to do with anger, kind of, sort of. And that's everything, and I will see you all next week.